Hey guys, now that the Space Marine Codex is out and the results from the tournaments are in, we can discuss how to build a competitive Space Marine list with the new rules. And without further ado, let's dive right in. First of all, the faction rules and my general thoughts about the faction in its current state. Oath of Moment is now significantly less impactful because we're only rerolling hit rolls and not wound rolls. The impact here is massive, but the good part is that we have received incredible discounts across the line, and I always catch myself thinking that I have so much to work with when I'm building a Space Marine list that it just doesn't feel like 2,000 points anymore. It feels like 2,300, and this is basically how big of a discount we received. So if we find a way to mitigate the loss of wound reroll, which is big, and don't get me wrong, there is a big difference in wounding on 5s and wounding on 5s with full rerolls, and it did impact a lot of our very high performing units, but there is a way to fix that, and even a couple ways if you think about that. First of all, we can just include more twin linked stuff into our list, which will be the same actually as having Oath, but on multiple units, which is nice. And thankfully, a lot of our really good units have twin linked. We'll obviously talk about which units I recommend just a bit later in the video. Obviously, hit rerolls with lethal hits are also a niche situation where you can fix the problem of wounding high toughness targets or targets with -1 to wound, which is a similar story. So we have ways of fixing that, and Space Marines are in no way toothless. And as always, when building effective lists, we want to, regardless of detachments, have several key things present in our list. We want to have reliable damage, and I personally believe that you are better off having melee and ranged output as well, even though the current game state probably incentivizes us to have more of that ranged output because it's sometimes hard to cross the distance and we don't have as many delivery options as we might have had in 9th edition. Plus, ranged attacks obviously bypass screens, but line of sight is still a thing, so that's why I want us to have as many options to deal damage to opponents as possible, and melee plus ranged is the way to go. We also need to have stuff that can spread around and be cheap, because we don't always want to put a 200-300 point unit on an objective to get that objective, or at least incentivize our opponent to do something about that. We want to have cheap units to do that and then provoke our opponent with the reaction. Also, we want to have some tough units that if we are at a stalemate situation and we're both very smart players, we know that we don't want to expose ourselves, we will know how to control line of sight, and sometimes you just have to show your opponent something and then hope that this unit will withstand the punch back. And there are some units in the game that do that very well, like Custodes Wardens, for example, which can essentially blank a phase of attacks pretty much, and I filmed a battle report yesterday where that pretty much happened. You'll see that somewhere in the future. In any case, Space Marines also have units like that, and it's always good to have durability when you can, because it means that you then can expose yourself a little bit more and then provoke your opponent to be active, and therefore you will be able to be active as well. Plus, even though Marines are generally quite good in terms of their stat line and cheap, there are some units that are just head and shoulders better than others, and these are the ones that we're going to concentrate on in the next parts of this video. The only two things that I would say Space Marines don't have in abundance are speed, because a lot of their units are movement 6, and I don't think that they have a lot of very high movement units or a lot of teleportation. Some detachments, as we'll discuss later, have those abilities, and you really want to utilize them when you have access to them. And speed is important. This is what wins you games in most cases. Obviously, tactical application of speed, not just having a unit that can move 12 or more inches. Invulnerable saves are another thing like that. It is not as important as it was in 8th or 9th edition, because now AP, there's just less AP going around and there's more cover. So Redemptor Dreadnoughts, they don't have invulnerable saves now, but when are you really actually going to roll that 6+ to save against AP4 guns? Almost never. You almost always will have cover, which is a 5+ already against AP4, and there are just less AP4 guns anyway. So 2+ save on Land Raiders, Redemptors other tanks, it's just a very good thing to have, and Space Marines do have quite a lot of units that have that 2+ save. So I wouldn't worry about shooting in melee. It's a bit more of an issue, but still I think that you are fine in terms of general durability of the faction. Now let's talk about our damage dealers, the units that we can really rely on to annihilate a part of opponent's army. In terms of shooting, for infantry stuff, infantry-based stuff, we have our favorite Inceptors, which are just a mainstay of Space Marine units, of Space Marine armies nowadays, because they can deploy within 3 inches of your opponent, so they have much less problems with a line of sight compared to other units. They can actually get their guns on to the opponent's important stuff much more reliably, and their guns are good because they have twin linked. The bolters give you a lot of volume with damage too, and you can, with some detachments, get their AP up into AP2 or sometimes even AP3, which is crazy, and that's where they actually start doing damage to tougher targets. And they have so many shots because of their sustain 2 rule that you will sometimes just roll so many dice and you'll just drown your opponents in saves. Plasmas are a bit more conventional, they also can kill your own models, so I generally prefer bolters a bit more, unless you have a definite problem, like a hole in your list with very high toughness tanks, then I recommend to have plasmas. So a mix of the two is usually advisable. Aggressors, they are a great unit in general, they have twin linked on their fists and on their bolters/flamers, so you are getting that reroll to wound back, you don't care about the oath not being what it was before. And also aggressors obviously have some nice combos to work with Gladius and Fire Strike detachments namely. Centurion Devastators, they are a tough las cannon/graph cannon platform. Las cannon probably in most cases. If you want to know more about them, check out my Centurion Devastators review that I made a few weeks ago. And they are just a good unit. They don't cost quite as much as they did in 9th or 8th edition, so you can actually afford to have them in your list. Their problem is mobility, so only a couple of detachments can really utilize them to the best of their ability. Eradicators, a cheaper version of Centurion Devastators, a different approach, so they are significantly cheaper. They are relatively durable with their Gravis platform, toughness 6, 3 wounds, and their meltas are shorter range, they are high AP, and they have full rerolls to hit, wound, and damage against monsters and vehicles, which is amazing, and it is what makes Eradicators work in most cases, I think. Their only problem is that they're strength 9, so against most monsters, most vehicles, you will be wounding them on 5s, and 5s is not reliable even with a full reroll because you just have so few shots. If you had double that, like 16 shots from the full 6-man squad, that would be a different story, but unfortunately we only are rolling 8 dice, so when you're rolling 8 dice there is a high probability then that you just won't get that 5+ to wound. So Eradicators are a good option for anti-tank, but not as reliable as the previous contenders and the ones that we'll see later. But still, they are good, and if you want to add anti-tank into your list, it's better to have Eradicators than not have them, or take something like Devastators, for example. Not Devastator Centurions, but Devastators. They're just simply worse than Eradicators, in my opinion. Hellblasters are also a nice, decent unit. They don't cost too much. They have this funny shoot-back thing that they do, so they don't really struggle so much with dying, because when they die, they will get another chance to shoot at the opponent. But their problem is their lower strength, lower of course compared to some vehicles and monsters. They're strength 9 if I remember correctly when they're overcharged, so you really want to have lethal hits on them, you want to have rerolls. So if you invest Lieutenant for them, for example, or if you invest Oath or both preferably and reroll all those hits, then there is a chance that you will do quite a lot of damage. However, without that, they're not as reliable, so that's why they are in the last spot here in the infantry section. By the way, just a quick reminder, if you want my help building your rosters, Space Marines or other factions, or want me to prepare you for tournaments, or just general 40k advice, check out the links to my Patreon in the description. Thank you for your attention, and we continue. Now, mech. My lovely Redemptors, of course, I love them. They are versatile, good in combat, good in shooting, durable. I'm not going to talk about them more because you know they're good, and I've already told you that multiple times on this channel in 10th edition. Vindicators, they are good tanks, just solid all-rounders, very tough, very good profile, universally good against both vehicles, monsters, and heavy infantry, which is a rare thing, because usually it's either you're very good against heavy infantry and stuff like that, but not as good against vehicles, or you are like a Gladiator Lancer where you have just two very good shots, but if those two shots don't land, or if you need to shoot at something that has more models, then you are screwed. Vindicator doesn't have that problem, but you're obviously paying more than for the Gladiator. Whirlwind, a wonderful model that gives you shooting out of line of sight. Shooting out of line of sight is incredibly powerful, so they are always good to have, and they don't cost too much, so if you want to run 3 of them, knock yourself out. Gladiators, the Reaper and Lancer are the ones that I'm mostly gonna recommend to you, because the Valiant, just those multi-melters without the full reroll to wound that you used to get from Oath, I don't think it is worth your time in points. But the Reaper, especially in the detachment that we're going to talk about later, is very good, and the Lancer is just universally a good threat against high toughness, good save targets. Land Raiders are generally nice as well with the profile, but of course the Redeemer is the king of them all and is significantly better than his counterparts, especially in Firestorm detachment. The Ballistus Dreadnought is a nice, cheap mech platform with 4 relatively reliable anti-tank shots, so if you want to have a lot of Dreadnoughts and you're running the Dreadnought detachment, then you might want to consider this Dreadnought. The Stormspears are both a support piece and damage dealing piece. The Hammer Strike, for example, has nice mid-strength shots in abundance and also provides a good benefit for your army, but the Thunder Strike also does a lot of damage and has a better support rule, because I think +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles is more important than ignoring cover in most cases, especially if you have a lot of AP in your attacks. Now, melee. Redemptors are again here because they are very good in both melee and shooting. Aggressors, again, for the same reason. Assault Terminators, they are relatively durable and not terribly expensive. They are expensive, just not as expensive as you might expect for 4 wounds, but they do really suffer from not being able to reroll wounds, so I would not recommend them above, say, aggressors or even Centurion Assault Centurions. Blade Guard are still okay, nice. They are good, not very impressive with their output, because Strength 5 doesn't go that far nowadays. Even if you add the Chaplain to them, they're still not going to perform incredibly, but they will perform enough for their points. Assault Intercessors can punch way above their pay grade, because they can have Chaplain in their unit, and with full rerolls to hit from Oath and both with full rerolls to wound from their own rule with +1 to wound, they can actually do a lot of damage to a lot of units, and even those that you would not expect them to. And Brutalis is an okay option for melee. You can use Tank Shock, you can use his own rule, so he'll do quite a lot of damage with those mortal wounds, maybe potentially some damage in combat actually, but I would not recommend him over the previously named options. Now, support units. These are the guys that will provide you with means to actually score points and win the game by victory points, which is how we win games. Of course, being able to destroy your opponent's army and withstand firepower back or melee back is important, but we also need these guys. So infiltrators, they are just great because there are a lot of teleporty shenanigans now in the game. Grey Knights, Genestealer Cults, Thousand Suns, a lot of armies have redeploys. Most of them have some form of redeploys, and a lot of them are really relying on that for their mobility, and being able to say no units within 12 of me whatsoever is incredibly powerful, though you're paying a relatively big price for just 5 Space Marines, 100 points. They are worth it, and you will encounter those teleporty types in easily 60% of all of your games, if not more. Now, Scouts, they are a cheap alternative to infiltrators, and they are, well, better than infiltrators in almost everything with their price, but they don't have the no deep strike within 12 aura, which is big, but they also can infiltrate, they have the scout move, they also can redeploy every turn if they are further away than 6 inches from your opponent and come back from strategic reserves, so they are incredibly good and also very durable for their cost. If you're not including 2 or 3 of these guys in every list that you build, I don't know why you would not do that. Land speeders, again, we already talked about them. My favorite one is the Thunderstrike with 4+1 to wound, but ignoring cover can also be nice, and these don't cost too much. So if you feel like you have enough damage dealing stuff and enough of other support pieces, you might want to include that, especially if you have a unit that would very much benefit from having that +1 to wound, like say those Hellblasters we discussed before, or maybe aggressors. Lieutenant with a combi weapon. He's our cheap lone-up character with more durability than you would expect from one Space Marine for 75 points. He allows us to have a lone-up without going for Imperial Agents, even though I would highly recommend to have Caldas anyway in all of your lists. But still, if you don't want to go Imperial Agents, I would almost always recommend to have Lieutenant, because sometimes you want to have that lone-up to push him onto an objective, if you can calculate that your opponent will not be able to put enough guns on that lone up to kill him. So it's like an alternative to putting your scouts onto the objective, because scouts, they are cheaper, they are more expendable, but they can be shot by anyone, so they can be killed. If you can calculate the movements of your opponent and see that your opponent cannot get within 12 of the lone up, it's even better, because he will just be untouchable by that point. And also Lieutenant with a combi weapon, apart from being a lone up, he has a reactive movement rule, so he can move back 6 inches if something ends a move within 9 of him, and also, which is incredibly important, provides an aura, not an aura, a rule of real ones to wound for a particular objective on the battlefield that you select in the beginning of the game, and all of your units will be able to reroll ones to wound when they're targeting stuff on that objective, which is very powerful. The company veterans, they are cheap and durable Marines, 4 wounds each, -1 to wound, and they can also have some extra other durability buffs from character that joins them, the captain that joins them, or maybe stratagems. So they are hard to deal with, and if you need to push a relatively cheap unit onto an objective and make sure that the unit stays there as much as possible and make your opponent spend resources inefficiently, it's a good way to do that. And also, if you want to run a captain, but you don't have a good unit to bodyguard for him, they are just perfect for those occasions. Kalgar, Vulcan, Hestan, Uriel, Adrax, and a lot of others. Jump back assault intercessors. They are cheap, they are fast with 12-inch move and fly. They are a melee unit to counter your opponent's screen unit. So if your opponent is pushing their scouts onto an objective, jump back assault intercessors are a good unit to respond with, because they are just slightly more expensive than that scout unit or an alternative from other factions. You will be able to kill them most likely with mortal wounds and your combat, and you are not expanding your more important, big, expensive units to do that. If you're feeling lucky, you can also explore maybe running a 10-man unit of these guys with something like a chaplain with a jump pack, or maybe Caven Strike, if you also want to try that, and they can be effective in that form as well. Now the new detachments. I'm only gonna cover the 3 good ones, so Iron Storm, Firestorm, and Vanguard. Not gonna talk about Gladius specifically, because we have talked about Gladius for a while now, and it did not really change apart from that change to Oath of Moment, which we've already covered in the video. So 3 of these will be enough, and I also provide a Gladius list at the end of the video, so you can see what you could build nowadays to be competitive from my point of view. Iron Storm Spearhead. You build this one around vehicles, namely dreadnoughts and good tanks, so Redemptors, Ballistos, Dreadnoughts, Gladiators, Lancer or Reaper. Reaper is very good, especially with the stratagem Mercy's Weakness. You can just get a whole bunch of shots from this thing. And you need Vindicators as well, because they're good tanks, as we discussed. Whirlwinds also work nicely here, and you must have 2 Tech Marines, because their specific exclusive enhancements that they get are very good. The one that allows you to blink a safe or vehicle within 6 of you, and also the one that allows you to have lethal hits on your vehicles within 6. And of course, you never leave home without Master of the Machine War, the 3rd enhancement. This is the only case in all of the codexes that we have now where I really think that you should have all these 3 enhancements. at all times, and this one allows your friendly Adapters Astartes vehicles within 6 of this particular Space Marine, this one doesn't have to be a Tech Marine, to shoot after falling back or advancing. Priceless enhancement in my opinion, and for the remaining points you just buy the support stuff we discussed before and you're pretty much done. Firestorm Assault Force, this one is a more balanced Space Marine detachment, so you have a bit of an emphasis here on flamers and transport, otherwise you are pretty much going to be adding all the list that you would expect from regular Gladius Space Marines. You are definitely running a Redeemer here with 6 Flamer Aggressors with a Captain or without, depending on your personal taste. I don't think you really must have the Captain, but you would like to not spend the 2 CP for the immolation protocols, which is an incredible stratagem that you really want to be able to use. It's a battle tactic, so you can use it for free if you have a captain, and it allows you to have devastating wounds on your flamers. And I remind you, those flamers are twin linked, so you can fish for those 6s for mortal wounds, and there is no cap for the mortal wounds, so you will be able to annihilate almost anything that you are within 12 inches of. You want Eradicators here, as the strength 10 on them will make a very big difference, as you will be able to deploy them within, hopefully within 12 inches of your intended target. So you will get that +1 for your strength from the detachment rule, and this way you will be able to guarantee in more cases than before that you will actually kill the vehicle or monster. Infernus Marines are cheap and much better here, as the strength 6 is much better than strength 5 for flamers. Impulsor tricks with Hellburst shooting back at something that shot at their transport, and other units as usual. Vanguard Spearhead is a more infantry-based one, a sneaky one, so you're getting -1 to hit when you are 12 inches away from your opponent, and also cover when you're 12 inches away from your opponent, so very good durability. You want Centurion Devastators here, you want Inceptors, you want Scouts and Infiltrators for the Phobos movement tricks, where they can move reactively when your opponent charges you. The tougher vehicle units are also quite good here, because you will really benefit from the -1 to hit. Redeemers like Land Raiders, Redemptors and stuff like that. And of course the Infiltrators enhancement, allowing you to push a large melee brick into your opponent's lines, infiltrating them within 9 of your opponent's deployment zone and other units, allowing you to actually like impose your threat onto the opponent with a slower moving, very durable, very good in melee brick, like Deathwing Knights or Assault Terminators or a bunch of other units that would qualify for this role. Now, a roster example for Gladius as promised. Apothecary Biologist combo with Aggressors, Fire Discipline enhancement in a Redeemer Classic. Just a very good tool to do damage to almost anything in the game. 3 5-man scout squads with missile launchers and sniper rifles. 2 3-man Inceptor squads with bolters to give you mobility and agency with harder to reach units of your opponent. 6-man Inceptor squad with plasmas, 2 Vindicators, 1 6-man Eradicator squad, 1 5-man Infiltrator squad, and lastly Calidus Assassin, up to exactly 2,000 points. This was my how to build a competitive Space Marine list version 2. Let me know if I've missed something or you think there is a combo that should have been covered. I might well have missed something, and I thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.